Earlier in the year, Nuke, the rework of Nuke that was introduced this year, was easily the most unpopular competitive map in the history of the esports side of Counter-Strike, because no team really wanted to play it. Teams and players frequently requested publicly that it be removed and say they wanted Inferno back, and all sorts of different reasons as to why this map should not be in the pool anymore. But what we've seen over the last few months is 3 teams rise up who are playing Nuke, and they really are kind of the Trinity of Nuke. They are the 3 best teams at it at the moment, and they represent different aspects of being good at the map and use the map in a different way, and they're having a revolution. If you look at these teams and what they're doing, this is having an effect on the rest of the scene, and it's going to force the rest of the scene to actually play Nuke as a result. Whether that means it ends up turning out to be a good map or not is entirely up to the future and for people to decide, but it's going to force a lot more teams to play Nuke than they had to, because the 3 teams that are very good right now is Virtus.pro, Dignitas, and Ninjas in Pajamas, NiP. So the issue was, before, it's not that anyone was just not good at Nuke before, which they weren't, but the key thing is, even people who thought it was like okay didn't have it up the top end of their map pool. So it wasn't being played and picked often, and people either could just permaban and then not have to worry too much, or they could just leave it till second rotation and know it's very unlikely it will be first picked by someone else in a best of 3. So it was never mained by anyone else. No one else ever had Nuke as their best and the most played and most picked map. That never existed. The only people who actually started to do that on some level was Dignitas. They did it back in the summer when, for the qualifier for ESL1 Cologne, they'd started to try and play it whenever they could. They knew it was a spoiler map that other people didn't want to play it, other people weren't playing it, and so if other people left it up, they were trying to force it. But the key thing is, back at that time, Dignitas were not an elite team. They were not a top 6, top 7 team in the world. They weren't capable of going for championships. They were just a team struggling to get into that top 10 in the world, actually. They were having their issues. This is like, I think that's actually just before they got Magic Spoy, so they weren't the Dignitas we think of now. So them trying to main it was more like an underdog team trying to get the odd spoiler win and try and get some kind of way to get higher up in the rankings. But it couldn't have a huge effect because it wasn't a truly world-class team. But now that you've got these 3 teams who are all sort of top 6, top 7 teams in the world, in the case of Dignitas and Virtus.pro, I mean, we're talking about top 3 teams in the world. I think Virtus.pro is the best team in the world right now. So when they're using Nuke, and they're good on Nuke, and they're picking Nuke frequently in best of 3s, now you're in a scenario where everyone playing them either has to ban it, which against those 2 teams who have a very deep map pool gives up even more to them in terms of other maps, or play it and risk losing on it is going to either force people to learn to get better at it, to adapt to it, or people are going to just start taking losses, and the revolution that these teams are going to cause is they're going to win more series, they're going to win more tournaments, they're going to place deeper in tournaments, and that's going to turn the whole scene around. So after Dignitas came along and started trying to force it, we then got into the world now where Dignitas became an elite team. They became very good. And now Dignitas and Virtus.pro were both very good teams using Nuke regularly as well. And now they were starting to use it to have this edge in the map pool and to gain ground in terms of the competitive scene, because the rest of the field didn't want to play Nuke. NiP was late to the party, but now you can see that they really have legitimately joined this status where they can pick Nuke whenever they want against pretty much everyone except Virtus.pro and Dignitas and be almost sure to be coming out with the win. When they play Dignitas and Virtus.pro, certainly interesting. They've lost to Dignitas in the past on it, and Virtus.pro, we obviously haven't seen them battle on it really. So now I think you've got this legit Trinity up there. And obviously the interesting thing is the teams out there who permaban Nuke, that's going to cost them in the future, because that's going to give up other aspects of the map pool where it's not like Dignitas, Virtus.pro, and NiP are only good on Nuke. So if you're banning Nuke against them and you have to stay banning Nuke because you're not going to be good on it, now they can pick their favorite map. Now Virtus.pro can go straight to something like Train. Now Dignitas can go, oh, okay, well, maybe we're going to go ahead and pick something strange against you that is your second worst map after Nuke. Now NiP can go straight into something like Cash, whatever it is that they want to play other than Train, basically, other than Nuke, rather. So one of the interesting things about this is that they have all found this way to be very good on Nuke, but in a totally different manner. I mean, the very simple way to say it would be this. Virtus.pro have begun dominating Nuke from T side. This is a team where they have gone 5-2 on Nuke overall, but those first 2 losses were the first 2 games they played on this rework of Nuke, and those were against Gambit in E-League and the famous SK Gaming match in the semi-final of ESL 1 Cologne. And those were their only 2 losses. And in those 2 losses, they lost to T-side. What's amazing about this team, this is really insane, is that they've started on the T-side, I think, every single time out of the 7 times they've played this map. And yet, the T-side's considered the harder side, remember. They've, since Cologne, won 5 in a row on this map. They've won 4 out of the 5 times the T-side on that map, the opening half of the T-side. So they're winning 8 or more rounds. 3 times they've been in double digits on T-side, which is monster, crazy performances. 1 against Dignitas, by the way, so that's no joke in itself. They've got a 4-0 record if they do win the T-side. So this is absolutely insane the way they're dominating. No one's dominating like this and just wrecking the T-side, running over you completely. Now, an interesting detail of how Virtus.pro is winning the T-side is this is one of the maps that actually Taz, considered the weakest member of the team, is actually seeming to either perform well or not overperforming on. Interestingly enough, he was actually famously good at nuke in 1.6 because on CT side, he was incredible at dropping down onto the hut area, the yellow hut. He was one of the best ever at playing on top of the yellow hut and knowing when to drop down to shoot people through the open gap area. That, I mean, I guess you could call it a door, but because there was a squeaky door, I don't want to confuse people. The open gap area, he was the best at knowing when to drop on that or when to stay on there and take people who are coming out of there, coming out of the door, and know how to balance that, which way to look. He was really, really good on CT side of doing that on 1.6. But also, T side of the map in 1.6, Taz and his team back then, so Taz, Neo, Pasha, I mean, Pasha was only there for the last couple of years, but that core, when they had their teams in the past, they were amazing also at the T side of that map. They were one of the absolute best that we had, even though they weren't the most skilled team, at getting a lot of T rounds on a map that famously was like you get double-digit CT side if you're really good. And Taz was one of the reasons because he would play an entry fragging role, he would draw attention, and he would just play aggressively. Whereas famously, the thing teams don't do on nuke is they don't play aggressively on full gun rounds because they're too worried that they're just going to run out into crossfires and just get wrecked by flashes and just sprayed down too easily. So people still want to take aim duels as though it was like Dust 2 or something. You only see people in general do rushes when it's like Tech 9 buys or ecos, and so they had a totally different style of playing the map back then. Also, I mean, he's the best player in Virtus.pro, but Snacks has been bodying nuke the times they've been playing as well. So Virtus.pro is doing it by straight up winning T-side and just winning games outright, and they have won 5 in a row on this map. Now, Dignitas is doing it completely the opposite way. Because even though Dignitas is a good T-side team, the way they're doing it is dominating the CT side. This is a team that has gone 7-3 overall. But one of those losses was in their first 2, which was against, I mean, this is the team that has Magic's boy in, by the way. I'm only counting that lineup. And that was against Heroic at Star Ladder. So aside from that, they've been having an insane run. But the thing that's interesting about Dignitas, and this fits with them as a team actually, is that they're not a team in general getting many win streaks on many maps. They've got a very deep map pool, but it's not that they're gods on all the maps. They just switch up the map depending on the opponent. So what's interesting is they don't tend to get like 2 or 3 map win streaks on any map. And so they haven't really been doing it here. The best streak they've had with the Magic Sport in the lineup is they won 3 in a row where they beat FaZe at DreamHack, Tricked at the League of Sharks, and then Heroic at League of Sharks. So even then, 2 Danish teams, one of them Tricked, not really at the level of some of these top international competitions. Otherwise, they tend to lose 1, win 2, lose 1, win 2. That's the sort of streak we're seeing from Dignitas. And part of that is because they rely so heavily on that CT side to win. Now, they've won CT side 7 times out of the 10 that they've played. They're 6-1 when they win CT side, and whereas Virtus.pro started T-side every time they've played nuke, Dignitas has started CT side in 9 out of the 10 games. And, interestingly enough, 2 of their 3 losses came when they were on the CT side. So you see how much for Dignitas, winning CT side is the win condition, is the primary way that they're doing it overall in this game. Now, it's not that they win CT side and dominate like, oh, they need 12, 13 rounds. No, a lot of the times they're getting 9 rounds, 10 rounds. They've actually never had more than 10 rounds on CT side of nuke. So this is a team which has a good T side, but they need the strong CT side to set the balance in so they can get those 6, 5, 7 rounds on T side that'll get them the win, but they're not Virtus.pro level on the T side. So interestingly enough, as we go through these teams, you're going to see which teams you can look at and break down the demos and figure out what they're doing to have their strength in that area. Then, after we've gone with VP, the super T-sided team, after we've gone Dignitas, a very good, very stable CT-side team, now we go over to NiP. And they're a team where, what's interesting is they've played the map 6 times, and we've won 4 of them. I'm talking about with Makalele in the lineup here. So, their 2 losses were to Dignitas, and Dignitas obviously is one of the best teams in the world on that map. They're a team where, aside from Dignitas, they've got some pretty solid wins in there. They've beaten Na'Vi, they've beaten Envy, they've beaten SK, they've beaten G2. These are all top 10 ranked teams, and they're getting wins off them. And everyone aside from, in theory, well, I guess SK and G2 aren't really playing them that much, but Na'Vi have started to play it. Envy definitely play it. I mean, they told me as much as Gfinity, where they were able to beat Epsilon on it. What's interesting about NiP is they seem to be equally good in terms of getting rounds on both sides of the map. Now, they're not gods on either side of the map, but they're good on both sides of the map. And so what's very interesting about it is they themselves have started T-side a bunch of the times. They started T-side 4 of the 6 times, and they've only won half the times they started on T-side. So nothing particularly special about that correlation. But in general, I ran the numbers, and they've won 53% of T rounds. So that's much better than you'd expect for average. Remember, people thinking that you're going to get double digits on the CT side. So if you can get half the rounds, like 7, 8 rounds, when you're, that'd be average about 8, I think. If you can get about 8 rounds when you're on T side of this map, you're going to have a very good chance to win the map. But interestingly enough, when they go to CT side, they're not super dominant there. They're actually winning less than 60% of rounds on CT side. They're winning 58.97% of rounds on CT side. So what's interesting about this team is they have a good balance, so it means they're going to have a good chance against a lot of teams on this map, and they're never out of the game, but also they're not the team where once they lock up a really good T-side, they swap over and you know, right, well, if they got 7, 8 rounds on T-side, this game's over. No, actually, their CT side's not as godlike in that particular sense, even though when you watch it, it has some good things about it. Get Right's been playing particularly well on the map. His rotations are very solid. They do look like the team play is getting back together. On T-side, it seems like part of it actually is like Freiburg's been re-energized on this map. Seems like one way he's been able to lock in. Again, I think similar to the 1.6 Taz reason, which is that if you play an aggressive entry style and you're willing to just run in, that's what so few other teams are willing to do, and so few entry fraggers are willing to do on Nuke, that's going to give you something of an edge, because that's really how you have to kind of play the T-side. T-side of Nuke still to some degree has to be kind of brute forcing it early, getting it into a broken strat area where you're in a 3v4 or a 2v3, and then playing from that with your individual skill and your team play. You can't just have a set strategy in the way that you might on a map like Mirage to take over the site, because it's not going to work the same way with the flashes and the smokes. So the interesting thing is, VP super dominant T-side, Dignitas has very consistently good CT side, NiP good on both sides, but as a result also not gods on either side. And the interesting thing to see is when you try to figure out, right, which of the Trinity, which of the 3 are the best on this map actually. So first of all, Virtus.pro are clearly the best. They've won against so many good teams on it. They're a team that has just outright been smashing T-side. Dignitas, I think, personally, is the second best, despite what people think of NiP, because they've got the very solid CT side, and they're still pretty decent on T. It's not like they have to get 12 rounds on CT to win. I think that's still pretty solid, and they've played it a lot. But the one thing I will say about Dignitas is when you look at their wins on the map, they are using it very much to punish the lesser teams. So their wins on it are against, like, Hellraisers, FaZe, Tricked, Heroic, NiP, Na'Vi, NiP. Okay, so NiP, very good team now, but still we're learning the map to some degree. Na'Vi have only just started to play the map. Tricked is just a Danish team that no one really knows that much about. FaZe are obviously kind of a mess of a team. Hellraisers, they're not bad actually. They're starting to get decent, but they're certainly not very good at the moment. And Heroic was good in the past, but I don't think at the moment you can really say that, because they're a team that got to a level and then they never went to the elite level. They got stuck at that particular level. So the wins aren't that impressive. Then you look at who they've lost to. They've also lost to Na'Vi, just started playing the map. They've lost to Virtus.pro, the best team on the map. And they've lost to Heroic, same team that they won against. So I think at the moment with Dignitas, I still think they're very good on the map. I think it's a stable map, but I don't think it's an auto win as a result. I don't think it's a map that they can just say, right, we're going to take it against anyone and win. I want to see more from Dignitas in that sense. Whereas NiP, I'll give it to NiP in as much as their wins and losses, their losses are only to good Nuke teams and their wins are to really good teams. So I think NiP has a chance to become up there with Virtus.pro as the best Nuke team, but we'll obviously have to see how that plays out, because NiP as a team aren't really at the level of Dignitas and VP at this exact moment. And obviously the key detail to add is watch how NiP has to adapt with Pith in the lineup. Because with Pith in the lineup, it's going to be different. All these stats I'm telling you right now are when they had Makalele in the lineup, and somehow they got that to work. So going forwards and they're bringing Pitt in, that can change everything. That can change the map pool. And so NiP is the one to really watch. But I think at the moment, VP and Dig, it's obvious that they are very good. That Trinity, I mean, they've risen to the top of the scene right now when they're able to do this. Now let's see who can adapt to them. Because now we're in a world where you stop and you think about it. Everyone facing those teams now has a problem. Either we got to ban nuke or we got to play nuke because they're going to pick it. So Navi's begun playing it because Navi wants to retain cash as their permaban. They don't want to be playing cash, so they're going to start playing nuke, and they have been at Epicenter. Cloud9 famously does not play it, bans it every time. They're going to have to start playing it, otherwise their map pool, which is already reasonably shallow, is going to be exploited. SK has lost the last 3 times they've played on the map, but that was to NiP and then twice to Virtus.pro. So they're only losing to the best teams, and they're having to play it because they themselves ban cash, and in general want to get Dust2 out second rotation. But that means SK is going to have to improve on it if SK wants to have a chance to be the world number 1 again.